Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher, and we're joined for our first segment today by my friend. Can I say that on the air live? We have Emily Toffelmeyer coming to us from Southeast Texas today. Hey, Emily, how's it going?
Hello, Ian, my friend. I'm good. How are you?
Okay, good. We're on the same page
Yeah,
there
you're
then.
good. You're good.
Emily is a former admission officer at the University of Southern California, and is here today to talk to us a little bit about film programs. Now, before we dive into that segment, I wanted to introduce Emily because we're going to be putting up this video on our Facebook page, and I don't want her to have to sit there awkwardly for 45 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes without me welcoming her to the show. But we're also going to spend some time today talking about the activities list for the Common Application in our second segment. It's a great time to get started thinking about that. And we will discuss how you can start thinking about your scholarship searches at this point in time. So those are the last two segments of the day. Find the videos on Facebook if you're on our social media, or you can, of course, just listen all the way through to the end of the podcast like you do every single week. Okay, let's talk to you, Emily. You're now on in the hot seat. We're talking a little bit about film programs, and we've got a great article coming out on the blog sometime in the next week or two about some of the components of applying for a film program. And you can find that information at blog.getintocollege.com. But let's just in general talk about when a student expresses an interest in film, what does that mean to them? What does that mean to us? And how do we think about that in the context of actually applying for college?
Sure. I think something that a lot of students I talk to who want to apply for film production programs, actually, let me back up and explain. Film production is usually a
Mm-hmm.
major where it's pretty hands-on, and you're learning about directing, screenwriting, producing, cinematography. And when you're applying for these programs that are hands-on, there's usually an expectation that you're turning in a portfolio of work in order to be admitted to the school. And so I think what a lot of students who are interested in film, they don't seem to be aware of this until they actually start looking at film major requirements, which is usually maybe now, maybe like summer before senior year.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at the list of requirements and it can be pretty lengthy and sort of a body of work that you've been putting together for a couple of years. So if there's any advice to give to the younger students, it's don't wait until the summer before senior year to compile a portfolio. You should already be building your skills and your portfolio long before it's time to apply for college.
And so I think if you are a younger student, you're a freshman, you're a sophomore, you think you're interested in film, you don't know if that's what you want to major in or not. As you're beginning to explore some of this area, maybe you shoot some short films with your friends on your phone camera, save that stuff, right? Compile your work. I remember in talking to a director of a visual arts program, she was saying that one of the advantages or one of the things that students should really do is to be prolific, do as much artwork as possible. Because when you're drawing from a portfolio, you don't want to think, okay, I need 15 pieces. I'm going to create 15 pieces this summer. You want to say, I have 50 pieces. What are the best 15 things that I can pull from that? Now, of course, with film, there will be fewer pieces in total, and students will have to pull a little bit more specifically from that library of artwork or film work. But you want to work on this content. You want to create stuff. But I think there's also elements of the film portfolio that are somewhat unexpected, although you think that they're the least surprising thing in the world. Shout out to the blog again. What are the other components that people have to be thinking about if they're going to be applying for a film program?
Sure. Well, there's the visual pieces that you talked about. And yeah, 15, I don't want to give anybody out there a heart attack. That's pretty unusual.
That's for
If you're
visual art,
for
visual art
visual
programs.
arts.
Yeah.
Now, there are some, if you look at film programs at art schools, like the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn or Cal Arts in California, you will notice those schools do seem to expect you to already have a pretty large body of work, not just in video, but maybe in painting, ceramics, set design, like whatever your art is. There are usually more components involved for an art school film program. But outside of the visual example, writing is a key piece. And I think that's the part you were referring to with the blog, is that's another thing that a lot of high school students don't seem to realize is that writing is a huge part of any film program. You can't really make a movie without a script for the most part. And so usually there's going to be at least one to maybe 3 or 4 pieces of writing that are in the portfolio. And these are in addition to anything else you might be writing for the general Common or Coalition application. So there's usually something that's kind of like an artistic statement, creative statement about like your vision as a filmmaker and some of the things that have influenced you. But then there's also just other writing exercises, like a sample from a script, a description of an idea or story that you have.
Hmm.
Sometimes there's just sort of odd things like NYU likes to ask you about sort of a variation on what used to be called like desert island discs. Like what are some of the non-essential items you would bring to a desert island, including films and books and things like that. So
Gotcha.
all kinds of writing. So that's another thing. If you're doing your applications this summer, if you're at Rising Junior and you have portfolios, you need time not only to polish your visual craft, but also your writing.
And I've worked with a few students who've been interested in film in the past, and you'll find that there are some very specific creative projects that might be required by this school or that school. But in general, a film portfolio is going to have some really consistent pieces across multiple different institutions that offer that film degree. Do you have any recommendations for some schools? Like, let's say I'm a junior right now. I'm really interested in film. I think I might apply for some film programs. I don't quite know which schools I'm going to be looking at just yet, but I want to get a sense for what the expectations are in order to send in the application in the fall. What are a handful of places where I can go and look at what their film requirements are going to be so that I can ensure that I've got the right ideas about what I need to create in the coming summer and fall?
I would probably look at the most selective film colleges in the country, which you can do all kinds of searches to figure out what schools those are. But
Sure.
off the top of my head, obviously USC, where I worked, NYU, Tisch School, Syracuse, Chapman.
Mhm.
I think those will give you the idea of what is a university film program looking for, right? Because these are general universities that host film programs. But I think you should also take a look at places like RISD, Rhode Island School for Design, SCAD in Savannah, Cal Arts, Pratt Institute. These are all art schools that host film programs, and there are going to be subtle differences between what they ask for. So I think if you visit those schools, you'll get a good idea. And while you're there, I also encourage you to take advantage of any kind of info session or chat
Yeah.
option that the film school admission people might be offering. So not your general admission, but often there's kind of a specialized session you can sign up for a film program. They love to give tips and be really transparent about what should be in your portfolio because they don't want to look through 100 bad portfolios. Like they want to look through good portfolios. So they want to give you
Yeah.
advice in advance.
That's right. And I think that they don't expect you to have a fully developed, body of work that is excellent across the board. That's part of what you're going to be developing when you come into college. They're looking for opportunities to see your potential and to see what sort of insight you can bring to the medium. And so I think getting their perspective on that front, don't worry about having to run out and buy expensive equipment and create a full feature length film. That's not the goal here. But I think they do want to see what's your perspective that you're bringing to our program, and how are you going to enhance the quality of that program, both as a collaborator with our other students and also as someone who's producing content coming out of the space. Now, just in terms of those two groups of schools, you've got the universities, you've got the arts schools. How do they think about the question of who gets in? And are there differences between how those different institutions or types of institutions are going to evaluate students for their film programs?
I would assume there are differences, but what I remember always being told by the film school admissions folks at USC was, like you said, it's definitely not about technical expertise. Like, yeah, there should be a baseline. You should know some basics of filming and editing and some of the terminology. And most students who get into these programs, they have taken advantage of maybe like a video production course at their high school.
Yeah.
And if that's not available, they've just taken advantage of the internet and all the resources that are there to teach
Right.
themselves. Um, but what I would hear from the admission people at USC was it wasn't that technical expertise, it was just the unique perspective. Because what I gathered from reading at least the basic supplemental for USC, like why this major,
Yeah.
so many kids would write about film, and it would just seem like every single one I read, for the most part, it was like another boy talking about Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And, I didn't make any judgment on that. I wasn't admitting people directly to the film school, but I thought, oh, I bet they see a lot of this. I bet they're
Yeah.
looking for people who have kind of expanded their film horizons, maybe beyond the mainstream and the big names. And then some of it is stuff that you as an applicant have no control over. Like if they have noticed that they have a need for a certain background, whether ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic, genre interest, special talents, like they need to think about those things when they're admitting people.
I think that's right. And there's a great parallel to lots of other fields as well. I mean, if you express an interest in biology because you want to be a doctor to help people, that's something that you see all the time among students who want to be biology majors, or students who want to go into computer engineering because they want to work at a tech firm in Silicon Valley, right? We encourage students to explore a little bit more of the subtle distinctions between what their interests are, and of course, to read and do research to inform that perspective so that you can go beyond Spielberg and Lucas. They might have been the reason that you initially got interested in film, but you might develop a much more specific kind of expression that gets to be a little bit more your own. And I think that that's exciting. Now, I worked with a student a couple of years ago in applying for the Chapman Film Program, and we worked on the personal essay for the Common App. We worked on the Chapman supplements, so why you want to come to Chapman. And then, of course, there was the additional portfolio for the film program where we had to jump into a new personal statement. And I remember him telling me, wait, didn't I already write my personal statements? What is this? How is this different? Can I reuse the same thing? And the personal statement in the context of a film program is quite a different project than what we talk about when we're talking about the personal essay for the Common App. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that personal statement ought to look like?
Yeah, I think specifically about an applicant I worked with a few years ago. And I do think she was able to have a personal statement for the Common App that was very much a different story. But I do think if you're a film applicant, you need to think about this from day one of the writing process.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
as you're writing your Common App essay, think ahead. Oh, I'm going to need to write a creative personal statement for my film program. So I want to be sure I'm not repeating myself.
That's right.
So for this student, her film personal statement, it was about how she developed a love for film, but it was pulling on personal family history about family gatherings and with cousins and siblings of how they would experiment with like an old video camera and make little videos whenever they would have these get-togethers, and then how that sort of blossomed into something deeper as she got older.
Mm-hmm.
So that was still a personal story we learned about her, but it was about her growth in film and that discovery of film, and then how she developed it later by becoming a working actor. So you were able to get a lot of new information from that statement. But I do think you should look closely at the description for each school and what they want to see, because USC says really specifically, bluntly, they don't want you talking about your inspirations and like directors you look up to or films that you like. And there's other schools that explicitly say, tell us about some of your inspirations and favorite films.
Yeah. And I think that points to this idea that with a personal essay for a Common App, it's very open-ended. It's got to be about you. It's about a personal experience that you've had. You're teaching the reader something about who you are. But really, I mean, we've talked about this on the show many times. How important is the prompt? How important is the question you're responding to? Not so much as the actual content of the writing, but with the film personal statements, you really do want to look at the prompt. You want to pick apart the specific kinds of things they're asking you to pull from, because that's a key part of what a film program is going to look for. And that is being done separately from the academic review that looks at all the other traditional components of the application. So they really want to see it from more of a film lens, rather than the other space. Sorry about that pun. There will also often be some sort of a creative piece. My student for Chapman was interested in the screenwriting program. And so he had to basically pitch an arc for a show. Like, who would the characters be? What does the plot look like? What's interesting about this? And it was a really interesting piece of creative writing that showed, I think, his imagination. How should students engage with that kind of piece of the project? And what can they do to get ready for an assignment like that one?
Again, I would really pay attention to the directions they're giving you. Talk to the people who work there to see what their preference might be. Because I feel like sometimes one of your options will be to include an excerpt of a script or just to a standalone, like 5-page script.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for students who are already really great at dialogue, that's a wonderful opportunity. If that's not really your specialty yet, if you don't really have that skill, you probably want to go for the option that's more something like a short film or is like a pitch for a story.
Yeah.
So, and there's different components too, right? There's maybe something that you write that is a script or a pitch or a summary, but then you also usually are going to submit at least one video as well. And that can be anywhere from like 2 minutes to 5 minutes, which I think is a challenge. Like, how do you tell a great story in 2 to 5 minutes? How to prepare for that, I don't exactly know, but I do think the students who do best at this, they're the ones who, like you've said, they've been goofing around with friends and collaborating and making videos since they were probably in 9th grade or had their first smartphone.
Right. And, storyboarding, planning from the beginning, think about what the arc's going to be, going through some direction. It's probably not something that you're going to do in one afternoon where you get together and make a film from start to finish. You have to consider all of the different pieces. But I think that's exciting, right? Like the fundamental idea here is that if you're applying for one of these programs, these pieces, while challenging, are things that you're going to enjoy putting together, because that's fundamentally the work of a filmmaker. And so if you're feeling like, I don't want to do all that, I don't know if I'm going to have a portfolio, well, maybe you don't want to do film. So think, really hard about what the project looks like and how that fits with your interest in spending your time and how you want to engage creatively. Do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share?
Well, you bring up a good point. If you are interested in film but don't have the body of work, there are programs out there that don't require you to share a portfolio, or the portfolio is just optional. And some great schools like Boston University, American, DePaul, Ithaca, these all have hands-on film production programs, but you don't actually have to submit a portfolio. So for those of you who don't quite have the work ready to go, just know they're out there.
Yeah, or just waiting for time to flex into that space, maybe wanting to develop a little bit more fully, or you're later on the scene in terms of determining that this is something you're interested in academically. And I think that that's perfectly acceptable too. The one refrain that I heard from you repeatedly, I think throughout this segment, Emily, was ask for help, reach out to these admission offices, see if you can get some ideas about how to create this portfolio. And I think that there is a tendency among students to not ask for help in this context, to say like, there's something wrong if I'm asking an admission officer how to apply to that particular college. But we would always recommend that that's a great idea. As long as your questions are, well thought out and you're not wasting someone's time. But yeah, feel free to reach out. Emily, thanks a lot for coming on the show. The film portion of this segment will be on our Facebook page, facebook.com/collegecoach, BH College Coach. I'm going to confirm that and come back in a little bit. Emily, this has been awesome. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.
Folks, when we come back, we're going to talk to my colleague Joy Biscornet about the activities list on the Common App, so you won't want to go away.